Hi friends, and welcome to Sustainable Prepping, your home for fear-free emergency preparedness and a sustainable life. My name is Becky, and today we are going to be looking at the intersection of sustainable living and emergency preparedness. If you're new here, I want to say a great big welcome. I'm so glad that you have found my slice of the internet. If you're not new here, I want to say welcome back. Please don't forget to like this video and click the subscribe button. We are growing because of you, and I want to make sure you never miss any of our fear-free emergency preparedness content. Now, we're going to be diving into the world of sustainable living as well as emergency preparedness and where they intersect and where you, depending upon where you fall in those two categories, can start adopting ideals. I think it's really important that we recognize sustainability is not at odds with emergency preparedness. In fact, I think they inform each other. If you have not already seen my video on can you be a prepper and not a homesteader, I'll make sure it gets linked in the cards. This is a great video that looks at how emergency preparedness taken to its extreme leads people into a homesteader or a subsistence gardening, farming, close to the earth lifestyle. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I did make a video, but the key here is there is a lot more overlap between people who consider themselves as preppers, emergency-minded folks, and people who consider themselves sustainable. It doesn't look like it from the ground, but if you actually take the 1,000-foot view, you look up high from the bird's eye view, there's a lot of similar concerns and there's a lot of similar values. Now, there are also a lot of different values. I'm not going to undermine that, but there's a lot that these two communities have in common. Now, before we jump into the details of all of this, I want to make sure we have some working definitions. There's a lot of different definitions out there for emergency preparedness as well as sustainable living or sustainability, and they're not always agreed upon. We're going to define emergency preparedness as planning for a future crisis, both local and global, so that your family and community can both survive and thrive. Okay, that's our basic working definition of emergency preparedness. Sustainability or sustainable living is defined for this video as a lifestyle of minimizing non-renewable inputs in order to promote a livable future for our entire planet. Now, what you'll see is that these are very broad and they can be interpreted in multiple ways. I'm not trying to get into the weeds about arguing what really is sustainable. What does it mean to have minimized inputs and what is renewable versus non-renewable? Those are important questions, but not for this video. The same thing goes for what does it mean to survive and thrive? What defines a crisis? What is local versus global? All of those are good questions, but they're a little bit too detailed for this video. What I want to take is these two definitions, surviving and thriving in the face of a crisis, and minimizing non-renewable inputs in order to promote a livable planet, and I want to see where this intersects. Now, the first place that you can see sustainable living, sustainable lifestyles intersect with emergency preparedness is that if you have a sustainable lifestyle, meaning you are already taking steps to have minimal inputs, right? Minimal inputs, you're self-generating in some way. That could be gardening, that could be solar power, that could be getting free of fossil fuels, whatever that looks like in your particular context. But if you are minimizing non-renewable inputs, you are already setting up a lifestyle that will be more sustainable. You'll be able to sustain the majority of your lifestyle after a crisis. Renewable systems, whether you're defining those as things that are systems like electrical systems, so renewable energy, or you're thinking about systems like home systems, like having a system of not using paper towels or buying in bulk so you don't create as much trash, or growing 50% of your calories every year so that you are eating truly local. These renewable systems are going to be more resilient than non-renewable systems. If the majority of the goods you need to survive are dependent upon fossil fuels, which is a non-renewable resource, your system lacks resiliency. You are dependent on a finite resource. And therefore, if that finite resource somehow becomes lacking, there's a war over it, it can't get to your region, you are in a pinch. Emergency preparedness people would want you to prepare in advance for that particular pinch. Sustainable living would say, get rid of as much of those pinch points as possible. Create a resilient system, create renewable systems, and divest yourself from these systems that constantly need large inputs, okay? So if you are dependent on fossil fuels to get to work every day, you either need to find an alternative method to get to work, or you need to work closer or perhaps at home. These are just some ways in which you can think about your system. Systems don't have to just be things like electronics, right? It can be your family system, your work life, where your calories come from, your food life. All these things are systems, and sustainable living is saying change those systems now. for the planet. Emergency preparedness intersects and says, change those systems now for preparedness. The second way that there is a big intersection and is a place where I think preppers and emergency preparedness people can really learn from the sustainable living community is the importance of going low waste and how having a low waste lifestyle now on the front end before we hit a major crisis is going to serve you on the back end. Now, I want to make a whole video about low waste and its implications for the emergency preparedness lifestyle, so stay tuned for that. But for this video, if we think about low waste, means you are limiting what you are bringing in and how much you are relying on the global chain system to bring things into your environment. Now, depending upon how strict you want to be, this could be everything from growing all of your vegetables and fruits for a year and not buying anything that doesn't come from your property or perhaps your neighborhood, to only buying in bulk, to trying to limit the amount of trash that you create, working with CSAs and local agriculture. What you're trying to do is limit how many inputs you need to function. So if you think about this in like a kitchen, instead of buying a giant thing of paper towels once a month where you are using and then throwing away, you invest in cloths, or you cut up old t-shirts or old sheets and create cloths. We'll talk about all that in a different video. And you create a reusable, renewable, right? You're going to use that over and over resource. Now, some people say, well, what about the stuff that you really need to throw away because of a paper towel? You can actually just take those old shirts, those old towels and things that are rags, right? And then once you have to clean up that nasty stuff, you throw the whole thing out, right? They can go in the compost or they can be thrown away. I will admit that I still have paper towels because with little kids, having something easy like a paper towel and not having to add to my laundry load is helpful, although I try to limit and buy basically a 6-pack of paper towels once every 4 to 6 months. So we do use them mindfully, but you could get rid of paper towels completely. I mean, some people have gotten rid of toilet paper completely, which is a little bit of a bridge too far for me, but some people have through reusable, washable cloths or bidets. But the point is, if I use paper towels regularly, I have to constantly buy that as an input because it has to be replaced. If I buy a set of dish rags that replace my paper towels, or I cut up one of my old t-shirts and turn them into rags, I now no longer have to buy that input. This creates a more resilient system. It's a system that's more closed. We're never going to have a completely closed system, but we can certainly close as many of the gaps as possible. This means that low waste as a mode of sustainable living is actually a prep for emergency preparedness. You're creating a more resilient system. It's awesome. So it's a great intersection point. My third point is going to touch on sustainable living and its attentiveness to the looming ecological crisis. Listen, friends, one of the places where emergency preparedness folks tend to lose themselves and lose their minds is about whether or not global climate change is real. Friends, global climate change is a thing. You can just look at weather data, okay? Weather data tells you that once in a lifetime storms are happening once every 10 years. We're going to have a Katrina once every 10 years. That is just the facts. That's the pattern. That's the change. And weather analysts can track it. Now, why? You can fight about it in the comments. I don't really care. I do think it is undeniable that the use of carbon emissions is speeding up, which might be a natural cycle, but we're certainly enhancing it. We are encouraging it to happen faster and with more extremity. I don't know if we're going to hit an ice age. I don't know if we're going to have global heating. I don't know. But what we do know is we're having intensity of weather. And anybody who farms can tell you that storms are harder, flooding is more prevalent, things are just more intense than they have been in our lifetimes. Now, sustainable living is a lifestyle that seeks to live in harmony with the natural patterns of the earth, wherever you are. If you live in North America, like I do, you're going to have the 4 seasons probably. Now, you could live in the Southwest where you basically have a dry season and the wet season, but you live in harmony with your seasons. You strive to eat seasonally, so we aren't creating a global supply system where you're going to eat strawberries in January that have been shipped to you from South America, right? We are trying to live in harmony with nature's cycles in order to limit how much carbon that we need to release through moving foods around, how much we need to be heating and cooling things. It's a style of living that seeks to mimic natural patterns in order to limit human-generated carbon emissions, human use of fossil fuels, human use of microplastics, all of these things that are harmful to the environment. Because sustainable living sees the climate crisis as probably unavoidable at this point, most people, I think, would say it's an unavoidable climate crisis coming towards us, so we need to change as much of our lifestyles now so that we're prepared for the coming climate crisis. I think that emergency preparedness folks can really meet those sustainable minded folks right there and say, okay, like, you're concerned about major climate change. Here's how you can start thinking about emergency preparedness. On the other hand, all of these sustainable living folks can look at the preparedness folks and say, you're contributing to this problem. How can we start changing your lifestyle now so we can perhaps lessen the blow? We can push that can farther out so that we can get more sustainable systems in place, more resiliency in place. The climate crisis and living in accordance with more natural styles of living and more natural laws is important. And a lot of preppers don't care about it. I mean, I think for any one prepper who's super into following natural seasons and cares about the environment, you're going to find 10 or more that aren't in touch with that. That's not their major motivation. So this is a great place of intersection, living more seasonally to stave off a major climate catastrophe while also preparing for that major climate catastrophe. My fourth and final major point is that sustainable living communities can actually teach emergency preparedness communities a lot about community building. Emergency preparedness has had a bad problem over the last several decades of this lone wolf mentality. I'm going to go out with my gun and take care of me and mine, and we don't need anybody. We can go bug out into the woods and survive without any help. That's not true, and it's never been true. Have there been exceptional individuals who have survived for days, months, years, decades alone? Yeah, but they're exceptions. They're not the rule. And whenever anybody says, I'm totally self-sufficient, I don't need anybody, I'm gonna always say, where do you get your salt? Most of us can't mine our own salt or harvest it. So we do need inputs. Also, most of us can't master every single skill out there. So creating strong communities of diversified skills and interests are going to only benefit us. But that means being honest about the fact that we have emergency preparedness plans. That means being willing to spend your time, energy, and resources equipping other people who may not be prepared enough or have the means to prepare to the extent that you can. Many sustainable living communities have already accepted this. They've embraced this lifestyle. Now, you may not want to join an eco-village. You might feel a little bit weird about it and think it's a little bit too close to a commune, and some are, but some are really awesome. They live in smaller homes, but they have shared commons. They have shared farming resources. People with particular skills can have shops where they barter with one another. They create these internalized economies that, while they do need some outside inputs, are fairly self-generating, which means all of these economies are resilient in the face of a global catastrophe. They have a fairly functioning society with rules, with communities. Some of these communities are over 200 people. We're not talking about, 5 families on a farm. We're talking about actual villages. They're pre-designed. They are about teamwork. You have to be willing to put time in the farming efforts if you want to get anything back. I mean, they can be very well regulated and well run. These might be good models for people who are in the emergency preparedness community who want to create something with other like-minded individuals. We can learn about healthy ways of building community as the emergency preparedness community from sustainable living community because they have been doing it for longer. People who've been trying to live more sustainably, lighter on the earth, have been doing that as an organized unit for longer than the emergency preparedness community has. They've been doing it since the 1800s, actually. And the emergency preparedness folks are kind of new. Doomsday preppers and such really only emerged after Second World War and the fear of the atom bomb. Now, we could argue about why that is and how grandma always had a year's worth of food in the basement. That's not the point. The point is that the organizing principle of creating communities around sustainable living as a pushback against industrialism and capitalism are more established for sustainable folks than they are for emergency preparedness folks. And this is a great place where sustainability can really teach emergency preparedness something, and where they can interact and overlap and intersect and grow from one another. All right, those are 4 ways in which sustainable living and emergency preparedness intersect and how they can learn from one another. Comment down below and let me know, what other ways would you see sustainable living and emergency preparedness interacting and intersecting? I am really curious about how you approach this conversation and you approach these ideas. I think that the hippie left sustainable living community and the more conservative right emergency preparedness community have so much to teach each other. And we have a lot in common, these two communities. There's so much overlap. And yet, because of some of our political differences, we aren't sharing resources. And that hurts us all. If a hippie who can run a household on very little inputs, can run a household with very little energy needs because they have figured out how to live simply, how to live with off-grid tools and resources. If they can work alongside an emergency preparedness person who has really mastered the art of bulk buying and of preserving for long term, then both of them are going to survive and thrive so much more. At the end of the day, if you believe in emergency preparedness, you want your neighbors prepared, because then they aren't coming after your stuff. They're not going to be a threat to you. They are going to be working alongside you to keep things going, keep things healthy, keep things well. And if you believe in sustainable living, you want your neighbors to embrace your sustainable ideals, because that pushes that climate crisis farther down the road. It curbs the intensity of that future climate crisis, and it creates a more sustainable environment for everyone. At the end of the day, we need to put aside some of the political differences, some of the rhetorical differences between these two communities, and learn and grow with one another. So let's keep the conversation going. Leave me a comment. Also, go and find me over on Instagram and Facebook. All of my information is down in the description. I'd love to hear what you think and what you have to say, of course, respectfully. Hope you guys are doing well, and until the next video, happy prepping.